Hey everyone, this is Vince, and today I'm going to look at the book, Bart Ehrman's latest book, Love Thy Stranger. So that's something I do on my channel. Is I just find books that I think you should know about, and I do videos on those. If that's something you're interested in, please check out the channel. So anyway, I found this to be one of probably Bart's most intriguing non-academic book. Bart writes books on an academic level as a textual critic. And he also publishes trade books, which are for a broad audience. And then what he does in them is he kind of takes these big scholarly ideas and he, dumbs them down, I guess, so that for the broad audience. So let's start off. The thesis of this book is pretty clear. Bart's goal in this book is to show that our modern understanding of loving people who are strangers or caring for the well-being of others, again, who are strangers, that comes directly from Jesus. Like that has been passed down to us, and it started with Jesus. Now, if you know anything about Bart, you might immediately be wondering what he's thinking here. Bart tends to be very divisive because Christians, at least evangelical Christians, tend to think he's at war with evangelical Christianity. And to some degree, he is. To be clear, by the way, there's a lot of ways that people define evangelicalism or evangelical Christianity. I define it by how it's used most often today, and that is people who believe that the Bible is inerrant and the inspired Word of God. And they tend to follow the teachings of Paul more than the teachings of Jesus, and we'll talk more about that later. In recent time, evangelical Christianity has, in popular opinion, come to mean people who are against abortion and any form of non-traditional sexuality. And many people, this is kind of was a surprise to me, many people kind of equate it with Christian nationalism. So those are almost synonyms. That last piece, by the way, was very shocking to me. And if you're interested in that, you can actually look up another book that I've done a video on called The Flag and the Cross, which is just about just sociologists that are studying this phenomenon of Christian nationalism. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is to get my definitions clear. I know a lot of people who identify as evangelicals would not adhere to all of these things, but that's how I'm going to use the word. Anyway, evangelicals typically don't like Ehrman because he operates more as a historian, and so he's not bound by the rule that nothing can contradict the Bible. Other Christians, by the way, for me, for instance, we like Ehrman, and we're at least indifferent to the scholarship, but it doesn't challenge us one way or the other. In fact, most of us find it very useful and really like scholarship like this. Anyway, Bart is pretty divisive because evangelicals hate him, and people who hate evangelicals, or just other Christians, love him. This book will probably upset both camps. The later camp, the anti-Christianities, often don't like to say anything positive about Christianity, and they won't like Ehrman's conclusion that Christianity actually did something good. And not just good, but distinctively good, and by bringing that loving nature to the world. If you're in this camp, don't worry. Watch the video, and I'll give you plenty of ammunition. I'm sure that you can still like Bart and still hate Christians, if that's what your goal is. Those in the former group, the evangelical Christians, well, they won't like this book because Ehrman's conclusion doesn't follow the traditional thought of Christianity. He's going to say that Jesus' teachings were almost immediately distorted by the early church, and so early Christians today, or again, at least evangelical Christians today, evangelical Christianity today is made of a sort of bastardization of Jesus' message. So, if I haven't upset you too much that you've turned the video off, if you find that intriguing, here we go. This video is going to go, I guess, through four movements, and that's kind of what the book did. Like first, Ehrman wants to show that the thought of loving strangers didn't exist in the Western world before Jesus. And then Jesus taught, so the second, Jesus taught that not only that we should love not only our neighbors, but love strangers, and we should do that in a radical form, right? Number three, the Christian church after Jesus had somewhat of like this dual nature where they changed Jesus' views, but they also kept Jesus' views. And I'll explain more of that later. And then the last thing is Jesus' views spread to where they're now the whole Western world, throughout the whole Western world, and it takes up this idea that we should love strangers. So that's really the four things, four phases of the book. All right, so let's look at his argument here. The first one is, Bart wants to firmly establish that the notion of loving strangers was not part of the moral landscape in the West before Jesus. The first thing he does is he talks about the Greek world, and he shows that morality was not really part of religion at all. In fact, the gods didn't care how you acted. Morality was part of philosophy. And philosophy cared about it because they were wondering, how do you live a good life? The question for Aristotle was, what does one truly want from life? And his conclusion is found in the Greek word eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is often translated as happiness, but it really means like to be fulfilled. Now, some people might think that eudaimonia comes from always being happy or experiencing the most pleasure possible. Others might think that it comes from having a lot of meaning in your life or having the most meaning in your life. But basically, eudaimonia is how do you live your best life? So for Aristotle, the person was very intimately tied to the polis, or the society around them. A person can only have eudaimonia if the polis does, right? Because they are very intimately tied together. And so there's this developing notion of loving others, but really it's only loving those who are close to you, and really you only love them because it helps you out, right? So you love those people who have the things in common with you, who make up the whole polis. And we don't need Aristotle to tell us that. Like, that's pretty obvious. In fact, Ehrman points out that's what most people think today. Most people think you love those who are close to you. That's what you're supposed to do. As history progressed and the city-state or the polis was not as important as it once was because it was just part of a larger empire, philosophers started focusing more on eudaimonia wasn't achieved by helping the polis, but it was achieved more by helping yourself. You found something inside yourself. Ehrman speaks here of three different philosophies that talk about eudaimonia and how to have it. The Epicureans, following Epicurus, said that people should seek happiness or commitment, and it's not what most people think. Like Epicurus didn't say, be gluttonous or indulge in everything, seek pleasure whenever possible. He said, seek those things that make you happy. The Stoics saw life as a series of events that we can't control, and so eudaimonia comes from finding inner peace. Basically, you can't control life, but you can control yourself. And then there's cynicism, and cynicism was an extreme form of Stoicism that found eudaimonia in total detachment from possessions. Like, you can't control anything, and attaching yourself to anything just brings suffering, and so you are totally committed to not giving a shit about anything. All right, so no loving strangers found there. So let's go to Rome. Well, Rome's moral code really centered on the will of the strongest. Like, the strong survive. The strong countries survive. The strong people survive. They can do whatever they want to. Weaker people just had to take it. There was no reason for the strong person to feel sorry for the weak person because that's just how nature was. Now, we do have instances where a weak person might plead with the strong person for something, like spare my life or something like that. But it's never done because this is what is moral for you to do. So anyway, like, you got conquered, you know you deserve to die, you're just begging for mercy. All right, the Jewish view. So in all of the Greek view, we have nothing like loving a stranger as your neighbor. In the Jewish view, it was a lot different than these, in that it really tied in religion and morality in the same thing. Like, in the Jewish view, what Greeks might call eudaimonia was in following the law that God gave. Well, in the law that God gave, God wants you to do both things: to worship God and to love other people, and this includes your neighbor. The thing is with Jews though, is what Ehrman's going to say is that loving your neighbor includes loving those people who are in your who are Jewish, like loving those people who are in your land and who are Jewish. Now, there is some passages that you can read in the Hebrew Bible that talk about loving the stranger among you as yourself. And the prophets talk an awful lot about all nations coming to God and worshiping together. But in these cases, what's happening is that these people are becoming Jewish, right? Like, we don't go out to you, you come into us. And so, again, we really don't have this whole thing of loving people outside as yourself. Now, there is a case in which it seems like some Jews are starting to get there. Like there is a book in the what the Catholics consider in their Old Testament, and what Protestants would relegate to their Apocrypha. And basically, in that book, this is a book by Jesus ben Sirach, and what Jesus ben Sirach says is a lot of things that are exactly like Jesus. Loving one another, loving the stranger, but there's going to be some big differences. So if you don't know what Jesus taught, like according to Jesus and according to the New Testament, according to Ehrman, Jesus taught loving everyone as yourself. He taught people should give all they have to the poor. He taught that one should love their enemies, and again, that was a lot like what Jesus ben Sirach taught. So Ehrman asks, well, if there was some Jews before Jesus who thought this way, to love your neighbor as yourself, like that's, then why does Ehrman keep saying it was really Jesus who changed Western thinking? Why doesn't he say like it was just the Jewish thinking that changed Western thinking? And Ehrman says this is for two reasons. So you're sticking with me. We're now on part 2. Like, Jesus taught not just loving your stranger, but a radical form of that. And he was different from anything that came before him, even Jesus ben Sirach, in 2 ways. One way is that Jesus was the one who won. Like, his followers came to believe that he was resurrected from the dead. They felt that proved he must be the Messiah, and all things he said were from God, and so they spread his message like very, very quickly. The second reason, here I was kind of disappointed in Ehrman. So Bart, if you're watching this, like you didn't make this clear. Like Bart is very clear in everything he says normally. Like, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm saying. This is what I said. But he didn't do that here. He said there is a second reason, but he never really clearly says this is the second reason. But luckily for my viewers, like, I figured it out. It took me a while. But in Bart's estimation, Jesus was an apocalypticist, or he adhered to the Jewish view at the time that God was going to come very soon and end the world. Jesus, Bart claims, is an apocalyptic prophet. And that's nothing new if you've read any of his stuff. Like, he says that over and over again. In fact, the title of his very first trade book was Jesus the Apocalyptic Prophet, which, by the way, I summarize on this channel. Jesus believed that the end of the world was coming soon and God's kingdom would take over. He believed that that in God's kingdom, everybody would be included, and so his followers included everybody. They included women, they included Gentiles. He believed that there would be a great reversal. The person who served or who was poor or outcast, well, that person was going to be made rich and raised up. If you served, you would be served. But if you were served, then you would be the servant. So his followers served. He believed there would be no attachment to material objects or even to family. And so he urged his followers to give up everything now, including their families. And it had to be now because the end of the age was coming very soon. Note here, by the way, that according to Ehrman, Jesus didn't just teach this stuff because he was altruistic. He taught this because he felt the end of the time was coming soon, and you were going to be rewarded or punished for how you treated others, including the stranger. Okay, so part 3, enter the Christians. Because of this apocalyptic mindset of Jesus, Jesus taught a very radical view of loving everyone. And because of his perceived resurrection, his view spread very fast into Christianity. And so after that, the world became more and more Christian. Everyone became more loving. Christians, after that, never really hurt or killed anybody. And they certainly didn't lynch people or own slaves. That's completely a joke, right? I mean, I wonder how many people like, yes, they did. Yeah, I know. Of course they did. Christians have perpetrated all kinds of evil in the world, including, and certainly not limited to, owning other people and killing people who did not adhere to their beliefs. So, how do we get from Jesus, love everyone, including your enemies, to Christians who take a break from Sunday service so that they can go out and perform a lynching? According to Ehrman, this is because almost immediately after Jesus, Christians changed Jesus' message. And this happened for three primary reasons. The first is that as Christianity spread, it spread to people who didn't share Jesus' view of the imminent end of the world. And so the idea of preparing for an afterlife was not as important as preparing for how to live in this life. And living in this life required money. And of course, the more money, the better. The second reason that the message changed is because as the Christian community grew larger, well, the message became less about helping others outside of the community and more about preserving that community and helping people inside of that community. And finally, Christianity was distrusted in the Roman world, and so Christians were often accused of being immoral. Well, to show them that they weren't immoral, Christians started caring more about proving people out of the community wrong, and so the emphasis turned into living morally instead of morality, meaning going out and loving others. So like doing the right thing, doing the right actions. Well, basically, like today, we'd say, don't drink and don't smoke, right? Those are the big things. Well, Christians kind of turned into that, where the big things were to show that you were a moral person and not necessarily to go out and love other people. Another change, and this one was a huge change, and Ehrman takes a lot of time on that on this one in the book, and so I wanted to share it with you. He says Jesus taught forgiveness. So, like Jesus said, we should forgive others regardless of what they do, and God will forgive us. Forgiveness means, by the way, that debts are canceled, no questions asked. Nothing is expected in order to forgive, except maybe that the person asks for forgiveness. Christians, however, started to believe that God doesn't just forgive. In fact, God can't just forgive. The thinking goes, God requires a sacrifice in order to forgive, and this technically is not forgiveness. This is a payment to God in order to essentially buy your pardon. And of course, we call this atonement. So Jesus preaches forgiveness. His followers went away preaching atonement. And those are two different things according to Ehrman. Like forgiveness is just wiping out your debts. Atonement is paying someone to have your debts wiped out. And it was done through the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus died and paid for our sins, and so God now can atone. God now can get rid of our sins. So here's how that came about. That came about because of the resurrection, right? People thought, okay, Jesus resurrected, and so his death must have meant something. Well, they looked at the Hebrew Bible and they said, oh, look at all these sacrifices and how they make atonement for sin. Well, Jesus' death must have made atonement for us. And so, therefore, like I said, this view changed. On a side note, I take issue with Ehrman here. Like he says over and over again that Jesus couldn't have been talking about atonement and the Christians couldn't have been talking about forgiveness because those two things are so different. Talking about them as though they were the same thing makes no sense. Well, you know what? That didn't even occur to me until I read this book. I know a lot of people who just never have thought about it. I mean, I agree with Ehrman now, but it never crossed my mind. I participated in an email dialogue one time with Dale Allison after he published his book on Jesus, Jesus Millenarian Prophet. And he said something that really stuck with me when I was reading a lot of this Jesus research. He said that it really flabbergasts him when historians claim that Jesus had to say one thing or another and that Jesus couldn't have said two things that were contradictory. Allison said, I contradict myself all the time, right? So Ehrman's saying that all this has to make logical sense. That's just not how people operate. Jesus could very well have meant atonement when he said forgiveness. I don't know. Ehrman makes a terrific point, but I took that one with a grain of salt. All right, so here's where we've been. Before Jesus, no one thought about loving everyone. They might love those people who are closest to them, but they certainly didn't think about loving the stranger. Even those who did think about loving the stranger, like Jesus ben Sirach, didn't have Jesus' apocalyptic view, and so they weren't as radical. Jesus taught love, but immediately after Jesus' death and apparent resurrection, Christians changed his message to accommodate their needs for growth and their needs to convince people outside the church they were not immoral, and their needs to strengthen people inside the church. So, how do we get to Bart's conclusion? We get there is because not all Christians participated in the changed teachings. More specifically, monks and monasteries. They kept Jesus' original teachings of loving thy stranger. This surprisingly fit really well with something I read from Richard Rohr. Rohr said that as Christianity started to grow and commit itself to more complex theologies, there was a remnant of monks, he says they were mystics, who retreated from society, and they carried this original intent of Christ into the future. And I never heard anybody talk about that before. I've never read anything like that. So Bart's book was the first confirmation that I heard of that idea, that there was this group of Christians who kept this original teaching of loving thy stranger, and they kind of went out into their own, and they started carrying forth that message. And so from those people, the teachings of Jesus stayed alive and eventually grew into what we have today, where loving people is just kind of born into us. We have hospitals, we have nursing homes. We think that government should participate at least in some way in helping people who are less fortunate. Now, we argue over how much government should help, but we all agree that there should be probably most of us agree that there should be some kind of assistance for the poor, and that we should have hospitals, right? That if a person gets shot in the street, we should at least try to help that person. We shouldn't leave babies outside to die and let the weather kill them, like in Roman culture, right? So in the West, this idea of loving strangers is embedded into us, and this really comes from that tradition that was preserved by the monks. Okay, so at the conclusion of the book, we reach Bart's obvious limitation. That's what we're getting here. And I don't say that in a bad way. I mean, his strength is ancient history, and so the book is mostly about pre-Jesus, and then immediately post-Jesus. And then he very quickly, he goes, okay, and then for 1,000 years, 2,000 years now, it just spread to the whole world. I'm not saying that's a critique, but it would be pretty cool to see a second volume that is how that spread from these monasteries into the world, or just this dual nature that preserved that stayed in Christianity. It's obvious today, this dual nature. Some Christians are very concerned with believing the right things and helping people within their church and being seen as moral, while others are committed to, or at least believe that we should follow the words of Jesus and love everyone. Okay, that's it. That's my summary of what I think is Ehrman's most provocative book. If you read the book and you think I missed something, please let me know. If you never read the book, but after watching this video, you're going to tell everyone that you did read the book, let me know that too. All right.